Good evening, everyone. Lovely to see you. Thank you for coming out. I trust you learned from last week and you've had a stiff coffee to get you going. I think it's the naive who went for the decaf. How's the decaf going to help you through this session? But okay. The end times to eternity and beyond. Let's jump straight into it. Those are the 5 sessions that we're going to be dealing with. We've finished session 1, which is a framework of key events in terms of what is going to happen as we approach the second coming and after the second coming. And so it is on YouTube if you want to have a look at that. Session 2, the book of Revelation. So as I was preparing this week, this thought did occur to me. Andrew, you are nuts. Trying to do the book of Revelation in one session. Yes, so it's obviously a long book, many different interpretations, but I hope that tonight is not going to be too rushed, because I do have a few more slides than last week. So this last week and this week are going to be the heaviest, I would say, from a content point of view. The next 3 sessions have got fewer slides and a bit less content. So tonight is going to be one of those nights where you do have to concentrate again. But I'm hoping to finish fairly close to 18:30, and we'll see how we go. I do just want to point out that in 2021, I did do a 5-part Seminary Café on the book of Revelation. So it's on YouTube or on our website. So please do look at that. It gives more detail of what we are going to be doing tonight. But the book of Revelation is so important, isn't it, when we come to the end times? It is a book written for the church as to how history is going to progress and what is going to happen throughout the church age and after the church age. And so we can't neglect the book of Revelation. From the book of Revelation come weird and wild interpretations and multiples of them, a vast number of books, all differing with each other. How to approach this difficult book and understand it correctly and responsibly. That is the key. I'm hoping that when we leave here this evening, you have a good idea of how to approach this book with dragons and beasts and those types of things, how to approach it properly, and some of the main lessons that it teaches us about the end times and the events that are going to happen. So you can appreciate this is going to be fairly high level. And as I mentioned, the 5-part Seminary Café that I did a few years ago will have a bit more detail, but not a lot of detail. The commentaries on the book of Revelation are thick, and the books that are written about it. And so there's a lot of things to discuss and understand, and I can't get into any major detail. But hopefully when you leave here tonight, you can say, now I understand how to approach this book of Revelation, and I understand some of the key lessons that it teaches about the end times. You ready? Okay. 6 things we're going to do tonight. I'm going to move fairly swiftly through them because you can appreciate there's quite a bit of content to get through. But let me just orientate your minds. A basic understanding of apocalyptic literature, which is what the book of Revelation is. Progressive parallelism or recapitulation. How is the book of Revelation structured? Then I just want to show in the 3rd section just how the sequence of events in the book of Revelation matches with what I taught last week from 1 and 2 Thessalonians. Then just some questions. So what about the millennium, this 1,000-year period? How do we are to understand that? Question 5, what is the beast from the sea and the beast from the land? that the book of Revelation teaches about. And then number 6, the big one. So what is the mark of the beast? And do I have to be worried about my bank that wants to put a marker, a chip on my forehead or on my right hand or something like that? So, or a government that wants to do it. Okay, so just those 6 items for tonight. Let's jump in. Number 1 then, a basic understanding of how to approach and understand a book like Revelation, which has got what we call apocalyptic literature. So the book of Revelation is largely apocalyptic. We do find it in the Old Testament. The book of Daniel has sections of apocalyptic literature. So does Ezekiel. It has some portions of it, and so does the book of Zechariah. It is a unique type of literature, and there are some rules around how we are to understand it and approach it, really important, so that our interpretation of the book of Revelation isn't just fanciful, wild and weird according to what we think it ought to mean, but if we follow those rules and the approach, I believe it becomes a lot clearer for us and makes the book a little bit more understandable. Okay, apocalyptic literature. If you read through the book of Revelation, I think you get a sense of apocalyptic literature. It is visions with images and symbols. So the first thing I want to say is that apocalyptic literature is highly symbolic. It displays in a vision events and pictures and their numbers and colors and their actions. That is largely symbolic. Often, number 2, it uses what we'd call grotesque images or exaggerated images to represent historical realities. So, and often those images are used to show the inequality of something, not the outer appearance. So, for example, in the book of Revelation, the devil is symbolized by a red dragon. Okay? And I'm going to explain a little bit about that quite soon. And I'm going to focus on that because we know for sure the book of Revelation says that dragon is the devil, so that we know it tells us exactly what that symbol is, and we can then understand the symbol. So not much is literal. It is mostly symbolic, but that doesn't mean that we can't know anything about it. Those symbols represent real events and people that are on earth. The difficulty is to understand what the symbol, how we to see what happened on earth and to be able to match them. Okay, we're going to get into it tonight, so just hang in there. The fourth element or feature of apocalyptic literature, especially the book of Revelation, is that it draws heavily from the Old Testament. So a lot of people in the commentaries today, they speculate about what some of the images mean, and yet you actually just have to go back to the Old Testament and it tells you what the image means. So I'm going to be trying tonight to give you some more certainty about this great book of Revelation, to understand what it means and to link it to the Old Testament so that you can see it's not just wild conjecture, but there are real rules and we can understand what the book of Revelation teaches. So, for example, the book of Revelation speaks about this great beast coming out of the sea. We don't have to speculate and guess what that is because Daniel tells us what that beast is. In the book of Revelation, there are horsemen, there are chariots, fiery horsemen. Again, we don't have to speculate as to what they are because in Zechariah, we find that there are these horsemen in apocalyptic literature. And so definitely the Old Testament, the book of Revelation is anchored with many of its symbols in the Old Testament, and we need to be guided by that. Okay, so now how do these symbols work? And I'm going to take an example where we know what the meaning is and what the symbol represents, because the book of Revelation tells us what it means. So we go from an area of certainty to understand how the symbols work in the book of Revelation. And I'm going to do it with the image of the red dragon, which is used of the devil. And the book of Revelation explicitly tells us that it says the dragon is the devil. So we don't have to have any doubt about that. So just an example. And I'm hoping then that this will give you some idea as to how the symbols work. Revelation 12, verse 3 to 4. Let's read it together. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. Okay, how are we to understand that image? So let's ask a couple of questions of this image. Is Satan a dragon? Of course, no. The answer is no. It is a symbol used of the devil. The devil is a fallen angel, right? Doesn't have a spirit. He is spirit, and he doesn't necessarily have a physical form. And so you can see that often the image represents the inequality of a being or a person or an event. Red represents murderous intent, often in the Bible, and dragon represents a serpent or a fierce beast. And I think it is modeled on, in the Old Testament, we have this creature called a Leviathan, and in some of the Old Testament prophecies, Satan is linked, I believe, to Leviathan and that picture. So do you see, the book of Revelation, the prophet or John sees an image in the vision, a red dragon, but when you look on earth, you're not going to see a red dragon, right? You cannot draw a picture of the apocalyptic vision or symbol and look for that exact symbol on earth. It's going to look different. The symbols often represent the inequality. First thing. Okay. Secondly, what we read in Revelation 12 was an attempt on the life of Christ. As he was born, it says the red dragon was ready as the child was being born to kill the child. So did the people at the time of Christ's birth see a large red dragon near either Mary or Israel, depending what your view is, what the woman represents in the book of Revelation? But did they see a large red dragon on earth trying to eat or devour Christ when he was born? Obviously, no. That is symbolic. What you saw on earth was, one of the events was Herod, King Herod, a normal person, trying to kill Christ. And remember, after 2 years, he went and killed the small children in the town to try and kill Christ. So you can see that the heavenly apocalyptic symbol and event doesn't look like what you actually saw on earth. What you saw on earth was Herod, Mary giving birth to a child, and Herod trying to kill the child, a normal person, if you understand that. So the image the apocalyptic image and symbol doesn't correspond to the exact events on earth and what it looks like on earth. But the events, the symbols do represent real events, right? There was an attempt on the life of Christ when he was born, and Satan was behind that, but he used Herod in terms of literally what happened on earth. So here are some conclusions about apocalyptic literature when you come to a book like Revelation. You cannot draw the apocalyptic image and look on earth in the events for that exact image. It is a symbol and doesn't represent the exact what it looked like on earth. You cannot do that from the appearance of the image. So the book of Revelation is a picture book or a symbolic representation of real characters and real events that happened on earth. And most often those symbols represent the inequality of things, not the outward appearance. Okay, absolutely important with apocalyptic literature. Just want to go back to that point. So, one very popular author and with a commentary on the book of Revelation, with the I just want to pick it up here. One of the trumpets, trumpet number 2, you don't have to turn there now. In the apocalyptic vision, he sees a great fiery star come from heaven and hit the sea, right? In the apocalyptic vision. So the commentary then says, this looks like it's going to be a judgment on the sea, and most likely a great meteorite is going to hit the sea. Do you see what the person has done? He's taken the symbol and the picture of the symbol, and now he's looking for that exact same symbol to happen on earth. And no, it's a symbol, an apocalyptic symbol, and what you would say is that there are going to be judgments against the sea, and a whole lot of other judgments as well. But you cannot take the apocalyptic image that looks like a meteorite and then say on earth you're going to also then have a corresponding meteorite, because the symbol doesn't match the literal events. That's not how apocalyptic literature works. Very important, and so easy, I believe, to make a mistake about that. Okay, that's all then I want to say about apocalyptic literature and how we approach it. Be careful with that one. It is one of the most important things to understand about the book of Revelation. Secondly then, progressive parallelism. And what this section is about, so how is the book of Revelation structured? How are we to understand? It's got a whole lot of seals and trumpets, and there's the woman and the child and their battles and their bold judgments. How does it all fit together? Let's jump into it. Okay. So this is one option, and you now need to have the two charts in front of you. And this is quite a popular way to understand the book of Revelation, and it's this chart here with the big circle in it called the millennium, and this is what I'd call dispensational chronology. So dispensationalism, as I mentioned last week, is quite popular today, and a lot of people hold to it. And the basic view of dispensational chronology is this. If you look at the chart, there it is. Sorry, I forgot I had that on the slide. That slide you need to look at. What they basically say is that the book of Revelation is chronological. They follow each other. So you have the seals, and they are chronological, and they follow each other. Then you have the trumpets. They follow after the seals. And then you have the bowl judgments, and they follow after the trumpets. There are some nuances with that. Some people say, some dispensationals say, well, the trumpets are actually inside the last seal. And the bowls might be inside the last trumpet, but we don't have to worry about that. Generally speaking, they say it's chronological. So as you read through the book of Revelation from chapter 7 onwards, you're finding a chronological sequence of the events that are going to happen. So then you have the seals, the trumpets, the bowls. If you look at that chart there, in the tribulation period, you then have this thing called a millennium. Just before the millennium, there are 3 battles that happen. Then you've got this 1,000-year age, the millennium. And then after the millennium, Satan is released. You've got another last battle within the white throne judgment and the new heavens and the new earth. And that then is the ushering in of the eternal age. So chronological, that's how you to understand the book of Revelation. There are some problems with that view, and I do not believe that view is correct. I cannot go into a lot of detail with this, but let me just point out 2 areas where this understanding of how the book of Revelation is structured just doesn't work, in my humble opinion. Let's jump in and have a quick look. Just 2 problems I want to highlight. Well, if you look at Revelation 12, verse 4, it definitely deals with the birth of Christ and the attempt on Christ's life through Herod. So it cannot be strictly chronological, right? Because that's in Revelation 12, which is obviously in chapter 12, after the seals and after the trumpets, which the dispensational chronological approach says is right before the millennium. So look at 12 verse 4 to 6. We've already read it. His tail, this is the dragon, swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which I believe represents actually redeemed Israel, who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. So the dragon wants to kill the Messiah as he is born. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. So we know that is Christ. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So that speaks of the ascension of Christ. So in verse 4, you have the birth of Christ. In verse 5, you have the ascension of Christ into heaven. So definitely it is dealing with the events in the 1st century. Okay? So it cannot be strictly chronological, because that doesn't follow after the seals and the trumpets. And then in verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness, the redeemed community, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Definitely not in the end times. This is right at the beginning of the New Testament. So how do the dispensationals explain that? So they acknowledge verse 4 deals with Christ and Herod. They acknowledge that verse 5 deals with the ascension of Christ. So that was way back in the beginning. And then they say suddenly verse 6 is a reference to Israel during the tribulation period. So there's a massive gap between verse 5 and verse 6. So there they say, and the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared for her. They would say that is part of the tribulation period with Israel. So you can see, to try and fit in a chronological approach is really difficult. Problem number 1, I believe, with the chronological approach. Problem number 2, which I believe is even a little bit more severe, is this. And I'm just going to take you to 2 examples. As you read through the bowls and the trumpets and the seals, we find that there are multiple end of the world descriptions. And there can't be many end of the worlds, right? There can really only be one. So, and I'm just drawing out 2 examples, and I'm going to point you to a few, but let's just have a look at it. So I'm just going to look at Revelation 6 and Revelation 14. And now you need to look at that chart there. And I know the writing is a little bit small, but you've got that in front of you. Apologies if you need glasses or a magnifying glass to read that. But anyway, I'm going to put up the texts before you. In Revelation chapter 6, which is seal 6, so this is right in the beginning of the book of Revelation. It is the first series that I've got there. This is the description. So just read it. Let's read it together and tell me what you think it is describing. When he opened the 6th seal, so this is in Revelation 6, early on in the book of Revelation, he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when it is shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. So after this event, you don't have a sky anymore, right? The sky, it says, was rolled up like a scroll. It was taken away. So we have a sky because we've got an atmosphere. So if this is not the end of the world, how do we exist when there's no atmosphere, for example, to breathe? And then furthermore, the same passage goes on to say this. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks, say, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who can stand? That is a fairly clear description, I think you would say, of the end of the world and the great day of judgment, right? The mountains and hills are gone, the sky is rolled up and vanished, the stars from heaven have fallen down, and here is the great day of God's wrath. Right in the beginning of the book of Revelation. And now you find that there are multiple descriptions of the end of the world event. So, for example, I don't have this up, but in the second row, the seventh trumpet, it proclaims the kingdom of Christ is here, and it says the day of wrath has come, and the dead are judged, and the servants are rewarded. So the seventh trumpet has a similar type of description to the sixth seal. Then in Revelation 14, we have this description. There's the chart again, Revelation 14. Now listen, this is another description of the end of the world and the judgment. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. The day of judgment, right? It carries on. Then another angel came out of his temple in heaven, and he took a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the altar, and the angel with authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. This is the similar description of the end of the world and the great day of wrath and judgment, right? It is the reaping. And so we could go on. So I believe the chronological approach to the book of Revelation just simply doesn't fit the book, because we cannot have multiple days, which are the end of the world. There's only one end of the world, and we find that there are very closely similar descriptions of an event that gets repeated in the book of Revelation. So I believe, with quite a few other people, that the way to understand how the book of Revelation is structured is in this way. There are a series of cycles which describe the same period on earth leading up to heaven. It's what we would call progressive parallelism or recapitulation. The visions, they go over the same events in history, but looking at it from different angles, and as they go, they give a little bit more detail of certain aspects of history. So that, I believe, fits what we see in the book of Revelation and is represented. Just want to see if I've got another picture of the chart. No, I don't. is represented by that chart there, which you have in front of you. The seals represent one cycle, and they give you an overview of what's going to happen on earth from one perspective, so that by the time you come to the sixth seal, it is the end of the world, and it tells you, and the great day of judgment, the day of wrath has come, and that's how that gives us one picture of the New Testament. Then the trumpets come, and it is the same or similar events on earth, but looking at it from a slightly different perspective. So each of those series represent a parallel events, but looking at it from slightly different angles. And that's how we can explain then and understand why you have multiple battles that sound like the same battle, why you've got multiple end of the world days and days of wrath. The great day of his wrath have come. You find it repeated a few times, and that's how we are to understand the structure of the book. Subsequent series generally provide more detail or depth. The seals and trumpets mainly view the world using apocalyptic symbolism. Revelation 12 and onwards deals with the spiritual or heavenly realities behind the events on earth using the symbolism. And I'm not saying that the seals and the trumpets and bowls are all neatly and exactly parallel. In other words, seal 1 does not equal trumpet 1, but generally speaking, they represent history reviewed from different points of view with different aspects given of it. Therefore, each section contains characters and events recurring in every age from the start of the New Testament, and or each section, and I know this gets a little bit technical, contain characters or events located in the first century that are prefigured and have multiple fulfillments throughout the church age. And I'm not arguing that everything is neat and tidy when you come to the book of Revelation and recapitulation, but I believe it is the position that best captures what we find in the book of Revelation. That is a mouthful for saying this. I believe the book of Revelation, you've got to be really careful with it. I don't believe a chronological approach to say that the seals are followed by the trumpets, are followed by the bowls, etc. I don't believe it's chronological. I don't believe you can make it fit that way. And I believe that this progressive parallelism in the book of Revelation really captures and fits with the data quite well. So each time you read through one of these sequences, you are going to get a view, not just right of the end times, but of New Testament, what happens in the New Testament from the birth of Christ through to the new heavens and the new earth. Okay, so that was quite these two issues. It was a bit heavy, I know, and a bit brief and overview, but I believe that best captures how we are to approach this admittedly difficult book. Number 3. So what is the basic sequence of events from Revelation that we get in terms of 1 and 2 Thessalonians that we learnt about last week? Because obviously you do have to be able to match them, right? They're not teaching different things. So this is going to be relatively brief, but just to say that as you look at these series of parallel events in the book of Revelation, it teaches the following: that there are events and judgments and plagues on the world that everybody experiences, including the church. Then you will find towards the end of each sequence there is a battle described, and you can pick it up in this chart that I give you. There are at least 4 or 5 battles. It's the same battle, just viewed from different aspects. There is a conflict with the forces of darkness as they are revealed in New Testament history. And then is the great day of wrath, the coming of Christ, the day of judgment, the reaping and the destruction of the Antichrist, and then the basically the heavenly kingdom is ushered in. That is what I believe you can glean from the structure of the book of Revelation. And there it is there. That's the chart. You can go look at it in your own time. And so 1 and 2 Thessalonians, I believe that matches that, because what we saw from there is we have a period of trials and persecutions of the church in the New Testament age. We have then towards the end of the age, the great apostasy and falling away with the man of lawlessness, or the Antichrist, being revealed at the end of this age. There's going to be a time of deception, false signs, wonders, that the book of Thessalonians speaks about, and I'm soon going to point you to that in the book of Revelation. We then have the single visible coming of the Lord, his second coming, where the dead in Christ are raised first. The church is raptured to meet the Lord in the air, and then Jesus comes with his saints and destroys the Antichrist. The Antichrist is on earth at the coming of Christ, and the church is on earth through that period. And then believers go into eternal destruction, unbelievers go into eternal destruction, and believers enjoy the eternal rest in heaven, and that is the end of this age. So I believe the basic sequence of Revelation and 1 and 2 Thessalonians matches, and that's how I understand the book of Revelation and how to approach it. Okay, so that was quite heavy and quite a lot of information, and I don't expect that you have just in one session been able to glean it all. If you can just go away and think about apocalyptic images and not to interpret them in a very wild way, and I'm going to come to a little bit more about that soon, and also just the way the book of Revelation is structured. I don't think we can take just a strictly chronological approach through the book. Be careful with the book of Revelation. It is fairly complicated. You just have to be careful, and those are the two big learnings I want to put before you. Now just three questions more. So this millennium period, this 1,000 years, how are we to understand it? There it is in the dispensational chronology. You'll see there. So the dispensational teaching is you have the church being raptured out of the way before the tribulation period. You then have God dealing with Israel in the 7-year tribulation period, and then you have the seals, the trumpets, the bowls. You have 4 battles or big battles. You've got trumpet 6, you've got Armageddon, bowl number 6, and you've got the great supper of the Lamb in Revelation 19. And then Satan is bound at the beginning of the 1,000 years. And then at the end of in that 1,000 years, Christ reigns physically from Jerusalem. So he sets up a throne in Jerusalem and he rules for 1,000 years. Then at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is released. And then you have the final battle, the 4th battle between called Gog and Magog, and the white throne judgments and the new heavens and the new earth. So they understand the millennium, that there is going to be a literal 1,000-year period where Jesus comes and he reigns from Jerusalem over nations of the world, and people are still getting married and having babies, etc. And then at the end of that period, there's going to be a massive satanic rebellion with a huge fight that ends the age. Let's have a look and read what it says. So are we to expect a period of 1,000 years in that way? Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and the great chain. And he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, and here we can see the symbolism, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. And when the 1,000 years, I left out 1 or 2 verses, and when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out and deceive the nations that are at the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and gather them together for a battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. So that is what the millennium is, as it is described in the book of Revelation. So how would someone like me, who doesn't take the chronological dispensational approach, how would I describe and understand this event of the millennium? So I would say a few things, and it might get a little bit technical, but just hang in there. I trust that it's of interest to you. Apocalyptic literature has symbols, right? So there is no reason to treat the millennium any differently. It is not literal. It is the apocalyptic image, which is a symbol of something on earth. So what does it symbolize then on earth? So the main objection, to see the millennium as symbolic is this. And I've been through quite a few authors. This is the reason why they say the millennium must be literal and it cannot be symbolic of what I would understand it describes the church age. The millennium is a symbolic representation of the church age. And they say it cannot be that because I cannot reconcile, they would say, Satan being bound in a pit versus what we see on earth now in the church age. We see the devil active, influencing people's lives. So it cannot be that what we see on the earth now can be reconciled with Satan being bound, right? That is one of the main objections to seeing the millennium as symbolic. They want to see it as literal. So how would I understand it? What does the millennium represent and what is going to happen on earth? First thing, with interpretation. So where does the Bible use similar language of binding Satan? And it is in the Bible. So Matthew 12, the Lord Jesus said something very interesting. He had just cast out demons. Look what it says about what the Lord Jesus did at his first coming. But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, it is only by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, that this man casts out demons. Knowing their thoughts, he said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand. A few verses later, but if it is by the Spirit of God that I cast out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. And what does that mean? And he explains, or how can someone enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man? Then indeed he may plunder his house. The strong man, I think clearly, is Satan. So what Jesus is saying is, the kingdom of God has come upon you because I have come and I am now casting out demons. How is he doing that? He has bound the strong man, he has bound Satan, and he is now plundering his kingdom and releasing people, casting out demons and setting people free. So I believe a fairly clear and standard interpretation of that is that Christ's second coming, at his first coming, there was a binding of Satan, a restriction of his influence so that people could be liberated from his slavery and his dominion. Okay? So I believe that same Greek word for binding of Satan is used here, and Jesus says that this happened at the beginning of his ministry. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I'm just going to go through a few little points like this, is that we all are able to reconcile two things. The Bible tells us that Satan is defeated and he is disarmed, right? So how come in Ephesians 6 it still says that we're at war against the devil and demons if they are defeated and disarmed? We are able to reconcile that tension, right? That there is a defeating of Satan, a disarming of him, and yet he still has influence, and we've got to wage war against him, right? So the restriction is not total restriction. He is defeated, he is disarmed, but we still battle against him. So how come then, how can we reconcile Satan being defeated and disarmed when the New Testament calls him a roaring lion? He's still able to influence, even though he is restricted. So I believe it is just as it's easier to reconcile Satan being bound in an apocalyptic symbol, it is easier to reconcile that binding with some influence that the devil still has during this time period. So I believe that that objection to a symbolic millennium is overstated and exaggerated. So for example, D.A. Carson has, I follow his interpretation of Revelation. I think it's really good, except that he changed from a symbolic understanding of the book of the millennium to a literal millennium. He changed because he said, I cannot reconcile the binding of Satan with what we see on earth today. And my response would be, I believe that is overstated and exaggerated because D.A. Carson is able to reconcile a defeated and disarmed devil with still us waging warfare against him. In other words, the New Testament teaches Satan is restricted, he's defeated and is disarmed, and yet he still exercises some influence, and we've still got to wage war against him. And that is my understanding, what the symbol of the millennium represents and the binding of Satan. Revelation 20 qualifies how the devil is restricted. It says, the aim of Satan's binding is that he can no longer deceive the nations. So in the millennium then, the gospel can go out and people from all nations will be saved, and the devil is not able to prevent it because he is now restricted. So my understanding then of this 1,000-year period is in the line with the rest of apocalyptic literature. It is a symbol of the New Testament age where Satan is restricted, but he still has some influence, right? Which I believe is what the whole New Testament teaches. And remember, the book of Revelation is symbols representing something on earth, and that is what I believe the millennium is. I don't have time to deal with other aspects of the millennium because we must just come on to the last two headings. So just to step back though, I am at the end going to give succinct answers to each of those 6 items. I know and understand there was a lot to wrap your head around tonight. So in the book of Revelation, we've got these 2 characters or symbols, the beast from the sea and the beast from the land. What on earth are these, and what do we understand they look like here on earth? Okay, so we need to understand, as I've said before, that the book of Revelation borrows from the Old Testament. So in the book of Revelation, there is a beast of the sea. I'm going to show you the text now, but look what Daniel says. We don't have to guess what the beast of the sea is. Look what it says in Daniel 7, 2-7. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, right? Different from one another. The first, notice the detail, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And behold, another beast, a second one was like a bear. A few verses later, and after this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful, exceedingly strong, and it had great iron teeth. Apocalyptic literature in the book of Daniel with beasts from the sea. Now, we don't have to guess what those beasts represent. I think just everybody, most commentators all agree with this, whatever view you take. The beasts from the sea represent empires on earth. And those empires could be represented by a ruler, right? So the lion with eagle's wings was Babylon. It was the next kingdom to come. It was the current kingdom with Daniel. Then the bear with the 3 ribs was the Medo-Persian Empire. The leopard with 4 wings was the Greek Empire. And then the dreadful beast with the iron teeth was the Roman Empire. So what does a beast from the sea represent? We are told in the Old Testament it represents a kingdom or an empire here on earth. So now look what Revelation 13 says. And I saw a beast rising out of where? The sea, exactly the same as Daniel, with 10 horns and 7 heads, and with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head. Now notice this. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, from Daniel. Its feet were like a bear's, from Daniel, and its mouth was like a lion's. So you can see it's taking those images directly from the book of Daniel, but it's now building the picture of a beast that combines elements from all of the beasts mentioned in Daniel, right? What is happening? So the beast from the sea in Revelation, the book of Revelation, especially Revelation 13, represents kingdoms or empires here on earth. It is not complicated. Just like there would have been the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire, there are empires and rulers here on earth. But it uses a composite picture of the bear, the lion, and the leopard from Daniel. Why does it do that? I'm not going to go through all of these points. I believe it represents then a composite or generic beast, which is secular powers or empires that are going to be on earth throughout the church age, with a final empire represented by the Antichrist, and it might be quite an extensive empire at the coming of Christ, whom he is going to destroy. So it suggests a recurring beast that is manifest multiple times in the church age, and there will be a final manifestation at the end of the age as the man of lawlessness is revealed. I believe he will be the ruler of an empire or a country that has spread its influence through quite a portion of the globe. And that is what will happen right towards the end of this age, and I can't go into all the detail of that. Beast of the sea is an empire that we see on earth, and with, at the end of the age, a particular ruler that I believe is going to be the Antichrist. Okay, I'm not going to go through this. We're running a little bit out of time. So that is the one character. I hope you're hanging in there. For those who had decaf coffee, I told you should have got a real coffee. Revelation 13 then speaks of a beast from the land. There are 2 beasts in the book of Revelation. The next is a beast from the land. 13, verse 11 to 13. And then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. So this is from the earth now, not from the sea. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. So it might imitate Christ. It looks like a lamb. It has the appearance of Christ, but now it speaks like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast, which was a beast from the sea, in its present, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of the people. So we don't have to guess what the beast from the land is, because the book of Revelation tells us in Revelation 19. And I saw the beast, this is the beast of the sea, and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the horse and against his army. And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, who in its presence had done signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. The 2 were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. So the beast of the land is identified as the false prophet, and it looks like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon. In other words, it mimics Christ, but it speaks deception. This beast of the land performs signs and wonders to deceive people, and he is called a false prophet. In other words, the beast of the land represents religious deception or false religion. In the book of Revelation, the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the land form an unholy trinity, which I believe seeks to mimic or imitate the Holy Trinity. And so let me just try and put this together. So what my understanding, the book of Revelation teaches, is that throughout church history and towards the end of history, there are going to be various empires, beasts from the sea, and those empires and states always have a religion attached to them, right? All your Islamic countries, what do they have? They've got a state, they've got law and order and courts, and what does the state always seek to do? Impose its religion and to persecute believers. And so that is what the beast of the sea and the beast of the land, I believe, represents, is kingdoms on earth, rulers, authorities that have a religion attached to them, that enforce that religion, false religion, and they impose that on the people, and they persecute true believers who do not follow that religion. So that is my understanding of the beast of the sea and the beast of the land and how the book of Revelation represents them. So that at the end of this age, we will have a particular kingdom, which I believe will be fairly widespread, with a ruler that will be manifested as the Antichrist, imposing a specific false religion on a major part of the world and persecuting, intense persecution of believers who refuse to follow that Antichrist and that false religion that is imposed by the state. And that is my understanding of how you interpret the beast from the sea and the beast from the land. I'm going to skip this. How to understand, it speaks about a mortal wound that was healed. Please go to the Seminary Café on the book of Revelation. I explained that a little bit. I do want to just get to the mark of the beast. And we're going to close with just a few more slides, because the mark of the beast is something that confuses people, and they are wondering what it's going to be, and they're concerned that somebody's going to put an RFID tag on our hand or on our forehead or some microchip or something like that. I know it's late and we're 3 minutes over, but we are nearly there. So let me just first of all say I've got a booklet on the website called The Mark of the Beast and How to Understand It. This is a very brief summary. So this is what the book of Revelation says. And it, the beast, causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or on the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. What does this mark refer to? I believe the Bible is in fact fairly clear, and let's just have a look at it. So this is going to be the last lesson in apocalyptic literature and how to understand it. The mark of the beast. What are we to expect? How should we understand it? The first thing to say is that in the book of Revelation, believers have a mark. I don't know if you picked it up. Look in Revelation 7, verse 2 to 3. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God, and he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the earth and sea, saying, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of God on their foreheads." So a seal was a mark. So believers get a seal on their forehead, right? So believers are marked. And then in Ezekiel, the book of Revelation is borrowing from the book of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel, the faithful are also marked clearly in a vision. So look at Ezekiel 9, 3 to 6. Now the glory of God of Israel had gone up from the cherub on which it rested to the threshold of the house, And he called to the man clothed in linen, who had the writing case at his waist. And the Lord said to him, pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it. And to the others he said, in my hearing, pass through the city after him and strike. Your eye shall not spare, nor shall you show any pity. Kill old men outright, young men and maidens, little children and women, but touch not one of them on whom is the mark. So in the Old Testament, did believers, the faithful remnant, ever get a physical mark on them? No. It's apocalyptic literature of symbols, right? And we don't draw a picture of the symbol and look for it on earth. So this was clearly a spiritual mark that people had. So the two marks in the book of Revelation, I believe, are clearly spiritual marks. They are not a chip that somebody's going to implant in your child's forehead when they are born at some stage or anything like that. It is a spiritual mark, and in the book of Revelation, everybody has a spiritual mark. And I'm just going to unwrap that for us. You either have the mark of Christ and the devil persecutes you, or you have the mark of the beast and then you come under God's judgment. Right? So the mark of the beast, I believe the Old Testament and New Testament teach that it is a spiritual mark and that we are not to be looking for the latest microchip or anything like that that's going to be implanted on our forehead or on our right hand that's going to destine us for hell if we made the mistake of getting it. Doesn't mean that if a government wants to roll out a microchip to track me or something like that I'm going to want it on me. But I believe that a responsible interpretation of the mark of the beast is that it is a spiritual mark and not something physical that somebody's going to stamp on you or on your children. Okay. I thought we were going to go over a little bit. So in case some of you are sitting here and thinking, I'm not coming to next week because it's going to get worse and worse, it is not. It is going to be a lot less content with more time for questions and answers for the next 3 sessions. I do apologize for the first 2 sessions. I knew that they were heavy with quite a lot of content, and it's quite difficult to concentrate through it all. So I've presented a lot to you tonight. I'm going to go through these 6 and give you crisp answers. I'm going to try to each of those questions. A basic understanding of apocalyptic literature is this: it is symbolic representation of real events and people on earth, and you cannot draw a picture of the apocalyptic symbol and look for the appearance of that picture on earth. Apocalyptic literature does not work like that. Don't do it. It leads to false and fanciful interpretations of the book of Revelation. Progressive parallelism. I believe the book of Revelation is structured in a series of events that describe what is going to happen in the New Testament age, leading into the judgment and the heavenly kingdom. And each of those series gives you a perspective from a different viewpoint and to a greater depth. That's how I believe it is structured. I do not believe you can take the chronological approach. I don't believe it fits at all. And so the basic sequence of events in the book of Revelation and also 1 and 2 Thessalonians, what can we expect for the rest of history going into heaven and the eternal age is this: we are going to suffer as believers persecution throughout this New Testament age. There are going to be secular kingdoms and governments, and they are going to have rulers, and they are all going to impose their false religion on people and persecute those who don't follow that false religion. And at the end of our age, there is going to, I believe, become a dominant kingdom with a ruler who is going to be revealed as the Antichrist, and there's going to be widespread false religion that is going to be imposed on a large portion of the world. And if you don't subscribe to that religion, you are going to be persecuted and restricted. That is how I believe this age is going to end. And then the Lord Jesus is going to come with one single second coming, with the resurrection, the rapture of the church, and then the judgment of the Antichrist, and the final judgment where we all stand before Jesus, and then there's a consignment into heaven and hell. So a fairly simple structure of what is going to happen. Okay, what about the millennium? I believe, as all apocalyptic literature is, it is symbolic of the church age, where Jesus has bound or restricted the devil, so that now the gospel can go to all the nations, and there will be an ingathering of the elect, and the devil cannot prevent that, although the devil is still partly active throughout this church age. The beast from the sea and the beast from the land, that is secular governments with a ruler imposing a false religion on people and persecuting those who don't follow it. The mark of the beast, I believe, is a spiritual mark, and everybody has a mark. You're either marked as God's people, or you're marked as a follower of Satan. What that means is that there are a lot of people walking around earth today who have the mark of the beast on them, and they don't even realize that it is a spiritual mark of somebody who does not belong to the Lord Jesus Christ. I don't know if you can walk away tonight and saying you've achieved some of this, but I hope you have. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word, which guides us and teaches us. I pray that as we come to your word, we would understand it correctly. We know that there are different interpretations and approaches to the end times, but I pray that as a church we might begin to reach unity on the end times and how to understand the different books. And so I pray that you would part us with your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. Definitely more.